to our the Gulf Breeze Area Historical Society General Membership Meeting, which we meet the third Thursday of every month. So that's tonight, and we're so excited to have a marine biology program tonight. I wore this just in honor of that. So if you'll bow with me, I'll get us started with the prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we just come before you tonight and we praise you, Father, for this amazing place that we get to call home. What a beautiful, beautiful slice of paradise. And we just thank you for all the provisions that you constantly shower on us. Thank you for taking care of everyone that's here, their families, their homes. And we pray for those that are not here tonight, especially anyone who's not here because of illness or travel, and just keep them safe and well. And just be with us and lead us and guide us and keep us in your will. We love you and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Okay, and I would, if you'll rise, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm going to ask Enrico if he would get us started off with that.
Go, Henry.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Okay, and now I'm going to ask our Vice President, Jim Cox, to come up, and he's going to introduce our special program for this evening.
I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, which probably most of you already know, okay, because he's been working here in Escambia County for 26 years. He's currently currently the manager of Marine Resources Division for the county, and he's a breezer. He graduated from Gulf Breeze High School in 1926.
That was you, Jim, not him.
1978. Okay, so that's pushing 50 years. You know.
Yeah.
We're not that old.
He's been with Escambia County for 26 years, but before that he did a lot of other environmental projects and programs here in the state of Florida. And we're delighted to have him here tonight to talk about a breezer's journey in marine biology.
Voyage.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks everybody for attending tonight. And I was looking for one of my favorite songs, and I'll have to paraphrase or try to remember it, but they who go down to the sea in ships to do works in great waters, they know the greatness of the Lord. And that has always been one of my favorites, even though I abridged it or abbreviated it somewhat. But so I was asked to do a presentation on marine biology, and I thought, well, the last one was a journey, and I said, well, how about a voyage in marine biology? So, one thing to a voyage is you have a starting point and an ending point. And I have high school mates here that graduated from high school, went to college, and graduated, went into great successful careers, and it was just steps 1, 2, and 3. Mine was a little bit different. I was more like like the little character on Family Circus. Mine is a bit of a meandering journey, but as I look back on it, I can see where those major points that brought me to where I am today. Those are places at the time I had no idea that would be experience that I would need, or knowledge that I would gain, or people that I would know. But nevertheless, I'll try to show you in pictures, and a lot of Google Earth pictures, to try to give you the points geographically that I touched, and then also some of the things that I learned along the way. So when I think about my voyage, I have to start back in my family's beginning, and this is Panama City, Florida, Bay County, and Gulf County. My father's family, my great-grandparents homesteaded on the Gulf of Mexico in Bay County in the late 1800s. And my mom grew up in Fort St. Joe, and they were all coastal people. So if you probably took a DNA sample from me, it would be a mixture of human and probably some sea creatures along the way. But I lived in Panama City for my elementary school years, and we scalloped in and around Shell Island and St. Andrews Bay. I hunted out of Weewa-Hitchcock in the Apalachicola National Forest, Hatesell, and just spent most of my time outdoors. My family were very outdoors oriented. We camped a lot, and we had a boat, so we spent a lot of time doing that. And I was always on the water. When I was watching TV, it wasn't, cartoons, except for Johnny Quest. I like Johnny Quest. But it was Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. That was one of my favorites. And so when we were getting ready to start the summer of 1971, I was given the news that my father had taken a job in Pensacola and was going to be looking for a house. And I was devastated because all of my places that I could get to by my bicycle that were on the water were going to be, I thought it would be taken away. But, and here's just a close-up of St. Andrews Pass. I learned to swim over here at St. Andrews State Park when I would, during the summertime, they would pick us up in a bus in front of Cherry Street Elementary School and take us by bus out to St. Andrews State Park, and we swam and learned to swim in that little protected area behind the rocks. And so when I found out that we were moving to Gulf Breeze, I was devastated. But my parents were smart, and when they took me to Gulf Breeze for the first time, we didn't go to see the house on Norwich Drive, and this is a horrible picture, but this is as good as I could get with Google Earth. They were smart enough to take me to Shoreline Park.
Here we
And
are.
I saw Shoreline Park, and I was like, oh my gosh. Back then they had lifeguards. And it was a beautiful pier. We had a boat ramp, and just all that shoreline was completely undeveloped from almost to the bridge all the way around to Deer Point, and it was just a paradise. So they said, well, you can ride your bike here, because we're only a few blocks away. We actually live right here in the off Bear Drive on Norwich. So I welcomed my new home and spent a lot of time. I mean, I would ride my bike down to Shoreline Park and park it, and I would walk all the way around and fish all this area. We'd go down to Deer Point and camp, and just it was a wonderful time and a wonderful youth. As I got a little older, one of my friends, Scott Cole, lived on Woodland Bayou, and they had a house and a little boat back there, so we spent a lot of time there. And then in, I think it was 1973, Tim Hoffman's family moved, and you can't really tell very much, but there used to be a dock that went all the way across the mouth of Hoffman Bayou. And there was a little boathouse, screened-in boathouse on it, so we camped there and fished and just had a great time. And so as I went through middle school, I wasn't a very good student in middle school. My parents were disappointed in my grades. I was probably a C student. And I remember they told me one day to watch the kids, because they had just built the high school right next to the middle school. And they said, watch those high schoolers. They're carrying books home every day. And I saw that, I'm like, oh my gosh. So it was like shock therapy. It shocked me into bringing my books home and studying. And I found that if, by studying, I could make good grades. Imagine that. What a novel concept. So when I got to high school, I started doing much better academically, and the summer of 1975 was when JAWS came out, and now I've graduated from Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom to Jacques Cousteau, and I was just enthralled with Jacques Cousteau because I'd been in the water all my life. We were snorkeling for scallops when I was 6 years old. and I saw this marine biologist, and he was just too cool. And and it's weird how Jaws kind of plays in the story of my voyage. But anyway, so Jaws happens, and I go to school for my sophomore year, and there was a new teacher by the name of Bill Price, and he was teaching marine biology. And I show up for the first day of class, and here's this long-haired dude with jeans on and leather flip-flops, and just the coolest guy, you know, even cooler than Hooper, you know. But it was probably about the third day in class, and we were sitting behind tables, and I remember I had Mark Schross sitting on one side of me, and Scott Huggins and Brett Curran sitting there, and I thought, I want to be a marine biologist. Literally day 3 of sophomore class. I came home so happy, tell my parents, I want to be a marine biologist. They said, no way. You will be changing tires or doing something. Marine biologists are a dime a dozen. This is 1975, you know, and they meant well. But they conspired with some of the teachers, and who was our guidance counselor?
Owen.
Coach Owens.
Yeah, so the guidance counselors, now I'm in school and I get inducted into the National Honor Society and I'm making good grades, but you don't need to be a marine biologist, you need to go into engineering or something like that. I said, I don't know, I'm really enjoying, you know, this idea of marine biologist. And so the next thing that comes along is scuba. Mark Schroff had just gotten certified at Skippers. And Skippers was doing a 2-for-1 scuba class. For $80, 2 people could get certified. So I'm asking all my friends to go and get certified with me, and I get certified, and that was it. I was in the water. We didn't have a big boat, but my dad would drive me out to Pensacola Beach, and I would swim off the beach out to where the just past the second sandbar. And there's just a little bit of a shelf out there, and I called it the shell bank because the shells would all wash up, and I could collect shells. Didn't think of anything, you know, not safety, not sharks, nothing. I was just in my element. I would swim out there, and then I would swim all the way down to where I was almost out of air. I'd swim to the top, and I'd swim back to the beach, walk back to my dad, and he would take me home. And I had all these shells, and I was just enthralled by the marine life. And then we were also diving the old shipwrecks. This is how I got into archaeology, underwater archaeology, was the old shipwrecks off Deadman's Island. We would ride our bikes with our scuba tanks on our back, ride our bikes to the end of Navy Cove Boulevard, jump in the water, and swim out all the way around and dive those wrecks. And we would find the stuff that you see over there. I've given away more than, this is before the Shipwreck Act passed, and so probably not a good idea. It wasn't illegal at the time. It is illegal now. But just had a blast. I would go down to Shoreline Park, and I just loved being underwater. In fact, my next door neighbor, David Carlton, lived next door, and they had a pool. And I would sneak out, this is not a fabrication. I would sneak out at night, put my scuba gear on, get in their pool, lay in the deep end on my back, and watch the moonlight come through the water. I mean, that's how hooked I was. So anyway, you know, I was really interested in marine biology, and whenever we would go diving out of Pensacola Pass, we'd always go past the Lexington was docked there, and when Skippers had the Chulamar, it was a big old wooden dive boat, and they would let me work on the boat for free, but I got to dive. So I would get there in the morning, we'd load tanks on the back of the boat, and I'd get out on site, and they'd get anchored up, and then I would help all the customers get in the water, and then I could get in the water, and then they had another, we call it Barracuda. They had another Barracuda that would help get them out of the water. So I was, you know, I'd be down there swimming around, and but every time we would go past Lexington, I would look up and I'd say, man, wouldn't that be cool to dive something like that? Put a placeholder there.
Or a skinny.
Spoiler alert. So, end up graduating, and all the friends are going to engineering school and law school and doing great things. And I just couldn't get past the marine biology thing. And so I said, well, look, let me do this. I'll just go a year to school at PJC. I'll take general studies, and I'll figure something out. So I went a year to school at PJC and took accounting and all kinds of other stuff. And that summer I was still not real sure, but Phil Kingery, who had a share in Skippers, his dad actually owned Skippers, Joe Kingery. But Phil, he ran the Chulamar, but he got the job for the underwater work for JAWS 2. And with the money he made in JAWS 2, he went to Louisiana and bought a handful of old, worn-out crew boats. And I was looking for a summer job, so Phil says, "Hey, come to work for me, and we'll put you to work refurbishing these crew boats." We were at Runyon's on Bayou Chico at the time. So I'm working there, and I'm grinding old flooring out of the decks of these things, and not real great work, but I was getting paid, and it was a job. So Phil came to me one day and said, "Hey, do you want to go and get on a crew boat out off Texas?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds cool." And he says, "Well, I've got a deckhand that doesn't want to be on the boat for this tropical storm that's on its way to Texas."
Oh, great.
So this is Tropical Storm Claudette. So Phil put me on a plane, flew out of Pensacola, flew to Houston, and then they had to put me on a small plane to take me to Galveston to get on the boat. So I get on the boat, and now I'm on the water for 2 weeks at a time, and I'm paid, by the day. All my food is paid. I don't have to worry about a place to live. I'm on the boat, and I get to fish, and I'm in my element. So I'm thinking, well, this is pretty cool. Maybe I want to do this. So I signed up for another couple of hitches and ended up working for a few months as a deckhand on a crew boat. And I was making, I think it was like $35 a day. But when you got off, you had all this money, so all of that money. But one of the trips that we made took out some surveyors for a company called John E. Chance and Associates out of Lafayette, Louisiana. And they were a civil engineering firm that their job was to put rigs on location and any kind of geodetic surveying, any positioning over the Gulf of Mexico in the oil field. They would set pipelines and do all this cool stuff. And I would go from making $35 a day to like $145 a day, and they would pay us 24 hours a day from the time we got to the office to leave the office. And I thought, well, here's a step up in pay. Let me do this. So I ended up moving to Lafayette, and at University of, back then it was University of Southwestern Louisiana, USL. They had an engineering program. So I said, okay, well, maybe engineering is, because these guys were the party chief were making good money. I thought, maybe I can do this. So I got involved at UWF, and I joined a fraternity, which was probably not the best thing because it took me away from studying. But my heart still wasn't into calculus. That was my horrible class. And I learned that if your heart's not into it, it's really, really, really hard to get your head in it. Mm-hmm. So I didn't study, and I made it through Cal 1 and couldn't make it through Cal 2. I took it twice, and I said, okay, this is not for me. And they said, calculus is the weed out course for engineering. And I said, okay, well, sign from God. But I still got my ideas for what I want to do. So I ended up moving back to Gulf Breeze in 1985, and got a place out on Pensacola Beach on Little Sabine Bay, that little embayment right there at the Mai Kai, which is sand shaker. So you can probably guess the temptations there. But I bought a boat, and I was going to be my own my own man. I was just gonna be a waterman. I was a commercial fisherman. I did underwater work on boats and just did anything I could do legally to make a living somewhat. And I did that for a few years, and I got a postcard in the mail one day, and it wasn't signed. It was from Cayman Brac, and the Cayman Islands said, "Hey Robert, I'm down here in the Cayman Islands. You would love it down here. They need boat captains and scuba instructors." So the whole time I've been going through the oil field and my diving, I'm working towards an instructor and a captain's license. So I looked at it and I said, I don't know who this is. So put it down, and then one day I couldn't stand it anymore. I just called the phone number that was on the postcard for the Tierra Beach Resort on Cayman Brac. And I said, "Hey, my name's Robert Turpin, and I got a postcard from somebody that said y'all are looking for divers." And she goes, "Oh yeah, you're Liz's friend." So it was a girl that I had dated in college in Lafayette.
Wow.
That went down to the Cayman Islands, and well, I get ahead of myself. So in the 1980s, artificial reefs were not regulated. So a lot of charter captains were making reefs, and I started helping out with these guys that were working out of the marina. And most of the reefs were either car bodies or big tires, and you see a washing machine and some kind of big industrial piece of metal, but things would just get literally tied together and dumped in the Gulf. And that was how artificial reefs were made back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when I was helping out. I did have to block out somebody's face because I wouldn't want to embarrass anybody, but this is what we did. We built a lot of artificial reefs in the late 1980s. But I went to the Cayman Islands, and it was fantastic. I lived right here on the west end, right on the beach on Cayman Brac, and the resort was here on the south end. And every day I would take people scuba diving, and we would go down and dive these vertical walls, and just seeing so much marine life. And people would ask questions, and I was always asking questions about what am I seeing. I was devouring any book I could get my hands on. And one day, I was sitting on my lanai, and I had a stack of books there, and I'm sitting in a little lounge chair, and I realized that if I didn't go back when my work permit expired and get a degree in marine biology, I would be missing my chance in this life. So it was impactful enough that I put a camera on a tripod and took a picture of myself, because I knew at that point it was as forceful as any message that I've ever received from myself to do what I really meant to do. So after my work permit expired, I came back home, and I enrolled at University of West Florida. And I found a professor that was doing artificial reef research. And so I came to him and I said, "Hey, I've got a captain's license and I'm a scuba instructor. Any kind of work that you're doing, I would love to help out." And he said, "Great." He sent me off to Louisiana to go collect some snapper for a study he was doing on otoliths, the little ear bones that they age red snapper. So he said, "I need you to go get on this boat out of, it was somewhere near Golden Meadows, and get on the boat, and I go and collect the fish, and I bring them back, and I give them to him, and everything's all properly iced down, and all the data's there." And he says, "Good job." And about 3 days later, he calls me up and goes, "Hey, I got another job for you. What are you doing this summer?" And I said, "I really don't have any plans. I was, maybe taking some class." He goes, "Come see me tomorrow." And he brought me to his office, and he said, "Look, I've been doing the field work on the artificial reef research, and I can't do that and write grants and write papers and get published." He said, "I want you to run the research diving program at the University of West Florida." And I was literally knocked over. It was incredible. The team, he had already hired 5 other divers, so I was in charge of training and doing the preparation on all the dive gear, all the boat, it was my show to run. And I did that. That paid for my undergrad. And after I graduated with my bachelor's degree, we still had underwater work to do. So I continued on, and some of the research that we did was looking at how artificial reefs function. How do they function not only physically, but how do they function ecologically? And there was another student that was on the dive team that was doing a master's thesis on what are the fish eating off of artificial reefs. Because everybody thinks that when you put an artificial reef down, it's classical, like island zoogeographical progression. That, you know, the first thing that happens is you get algae growing on the reef, and then you get barnacles, and then you get, you know, then the fish come in to eat the barnacles, and then the bigger fish come in to do that. And what we learned from taking fish from around the artificial reef and looking at their gut contents, that's not the way it works. They're feeding mostly in, they're feeding mostly in the sand around the reefs and then the water column above the reefs. So that was, you know, relatively new information that we learned. So my job was to go underwater, literally, and count fish. So here I am, taking up a position. I've got my little underwater slate, and I'm just counting and identifying fish. And that's what I did for 5 summers at the University of West Florida. I still have my recreational diving, but really it was most of my diving now was focused on science. And I was able to co-author on a big study that went from Pensacola all the way to Panama City. We had 90 reefs that we studied. And then after Hurricane Opal, I was given an opportunity to do a master's thesis on the effects of hurricanes and fishing on artificial reefs. So that was really interesting. But this idea of the fact that the fish are eating out of either the sand or in the plankton, really, it was a powerful lesson for me to learn. And it ended up directing some of my artificial reef decisions even today. Other things that I would observe was, you can see 2 flounder here. These are Gulf flounder. And in the fall of the year, Gulf flounder spawn. And I was diving about 5 miles off the beach, and I saw these flounder were all paired up. And it was interesting because the smaller males were facing the vent of the female, and I suspect that they're probably picking up some kind of olfactory cue when the female is ready to spawn. So I took 2 of these up with a spear gun. I took 2 of them home, and I opened them up, and I mixed their gametes up in some seawater. Literally, this is on my kitchen table. My roommate, Jeff Schroeder, who we all went to high school with, he was not kind enough to let me live there. And so I mixed this eggs and sperm up in this little dish and put it under a microscope, and 45 minutes later I see the first cell division. 45 minutes later I see the second cell division. And within about 36 hours I had a little baby flounder swimming around. And flounder, when they're young, when they're larval, they swim upright just like any other fish. As they develop, the eye migrates, and our flounder here are left-eyed flounder, so the right eye migrates to the other side. They lay on their right side with the left side up, and they can camouflage. They can really they can change the color and the texture of patterns, not texture, but patterns of their coloration here to match the surroundings. And it's a cool lesson. As I'm in college, I've got this framework of all these questions that I've been asking, that all these observations that I've been making all these years. So when I'm sitting in a class, it's very easy for me to take that information and put it where it needs to be. And one particular one that kind of got me in trouble, but when I was in the Cayman Islands, we were diving, like I said, on this vertical wall with these ledges up underneath, and you could look up inside these ledges to see lobster and shrimp, but you would see this glowing red. It's a coralline algae, but red light does not exist at 90 feet of seawater. Red light gets absorbed in the first 30, 40 feet of seawater. So there is no red down there. But yet I'm seeing this, and I'm asking people that are on the boat, that, you know, if I find out somebody's a marine biologist, I'm asking questions, you know, I'm trying to figure this out. Nobody could tell me the answer. So I'm sitting at UWF in an aquatic botany class, and my teacher is writing the photosynthetic pathway for photons of ultraviolet light that hit the chlorophyll in a plant that it's a cascading effect. So this photon, as it takes each step down the stairs, so just like a set of stairs the way she drew it, and she draws an arrow that comes out, and it's in the red spectrum. And I'm sitting in the class, and I said, well, there you go. And she goes, what? Like, so literally said it out loud. It was such a great thing for me to understand that was where the red light came from. It was the photosynthetic process that absorbed the energy out of that ultraviolet light, that when it popped out, it was infrared, or in the red spectrum. So she didn't like the fact that I interrupted her class, but when I told her what it was, then she said, okay, well, I guess I can forgive her. Another project that I did, one of my graduates classes, was in coastal geomorphology. And it's about the way that the land and water interact, and the way that the land and the land kind of responds to the forces of the water. And at the time, one of my classmates, Pam King, her dad and her family, they lived in this house here on Seguinza Drive, and they had a beautiful lawn, St. Augustine grass, but it was eroding. And he called me up and said, hey, would you help me build a seawall? And I said, no, I won't, but I just learned this new thing called the living shoreline, and we can build a living community of plants that are tolerant to the salt, that'll buffer the shoreline from your turf grass. And he goes, I don't think so.
What?
I said, look, it's way cheaper, and it's a lot better for the environment. He goes, no, I don't think so. I don't want to take any chances. I'm going to do a seawall. I said, okay, well, good luck. So he calls me back a little bit later and says, hey, I just found out how much seawalls cost. What's it going to cost me to do this planting? I said, the plants are called salt marsh cordgrass, and they cost about 25 cents a piece. And you're going to buy, you know, I can't remember, it's like 900 plants. So you're going to buy 900 plants, and you're going to buy, you know, enough pizza and beer for me and my other graduate students that are going to come build this for you. So we built my first living shoreline was right there on Pensacola Beach. And the first year, it was iffy. I had to come back out and put some concrete blocks to give it enough energy dissipation. But finally, it took off. And now if you go out there, you'll see a beautiful salt marsh cordgrass, and then there's a lawn behind it. So it was a lot cheaper for him and a lot better on the environment.
Wonderful.
So as I was finishing up my work at the University of West Florida, I almost had my thesis in the library. I'd already published it. I defended the thesis, and I was done with coursework. And the professor that I was working for, Dr. Bortone, took a sabbatical and went down to the Florida Center for Environmental Studies. It's at Florida Atlantic University, and they had a research job that they were doing here out of the South Florida Water Management District's office. But it was looking at grasses up in the Caloosahatchee River, and also grouper in the seagrasses down in Pine Island Sound and in the area behind Sanibel Island. And he goes, hey, why don't you come down and work for me here? I need somebody I can trust that can, you know, run the boat and do all the stuff, so I can just write up the results. And I said, well, I hadn't finished my thesis. He goes, well, you can work on that while you're working here. I said, okay. So I ended up moving to Fort Myers, Sanibel Island, and it was really great job. We were pulling the same kind of scallop drag that I'd drawn as a kid in St. Andrews Bay. We were dragging this scallop drag and catching these juvenile. This is a gag grouper. So this is, you know, it's 24 centimeters. You know, it's That's an inch long. And when it's alive, it is exactly the color of the blades of turtle grass. You could swim right over the top of them and you'd never see them because they're perfectly mimicking. So one of the studies that we did was on the use of the seagrass beds by gag grouper. Really, really cool. And also got the chance to work on the Kissimmee River Restoration Project, one of the first pre-Everglades restoration projects. It's in the Kissimmee River was channelized back in the 1960s as the C-38 canal. And when they channelized that river that used to flood into the floodplain and then suck back into the river and bring back all that biological energy from all the insects and all the plants back into the river as the seasons changed, it fed that ecosystem. Well, as soon as they channelized that and cut it off from the floodplain, everything died off. The fish, the birds, reptiles, it was really bad. So they came back in and they said, okay, we're going to do a test. We're going to try to restore the middle third of it. So the whole project cost them, to build the C-38 canal, was like $50 million to do the whole project. So when they made that canal with these big levees on either side, it cut off the floodplain. So now all that land was used by farmers and cattle ranchers. So what cost them $50 million to do in the 60s, when they came back in the 1990s to try to get back all that land, it cost over $500 million just to do the middle third. But I got to do some of the work on that, and we took a lot of scientists out, and I just pretty much just ran a boat. But it was really cool to see that restoration project. So as that project was winding down, I found out that Okaloosa and Walton County were looking for a sea grant agent, and it would get me back home to where my girlfriend lived. And I said, okay, I'll apply for this job, and I got hired on for the Okaloosa and Walton County Sea Grant Extension Agent. And that's a job as a marine biologist, is to give the stakeholders the information they need so they can use the resources wisely. And it was fantastic. I loved it. I had an office right on Choctawhatchee Bay, just a beautiful spot, right, looking right out through the live oaks onto the bay. And I had been there about 6 months, and I got a call from a friend of mine back in Gulf Breeze. And he worked for Escambia County. He says, hey man, he said, Escambia County is needing somebody that can work on their artificial reef projects. They've got an advisory committee, a bunch of volunteers that have been doing it for years, and they need somebody that can do it professionally, somebody that knows artificial reefs. He said, and I've told him you're the man. So, if you want the job, come interview. So I came and interviewed, and the first interview went really well, and they said, okay, well, this position is marine recreation. I said, well, I'm not interested in marine recreation. If you're managing for recreation and not the resource, you can get unintended consequences. And we've all seen what happens when you have overuse of a resource. This is Pensacola Beach on a Blue Angels Day a few years ago, and I said I'm not interested in marine recreation. However, if you were to make it marine resources, I'll take the job. So it became Marine Resources Division, and they asked me to put together, how the division was going to work, because it was from scratch. So I literally got to choose what I was going to be working on with their work requirements. So it was a very interesting and first few weeks, because everybody that found out that I was there were dumping projects on me. The Parks Department that didn't want to deal with the boat ramps, they said, oh, Waterways Access, Marine Resources. The guys in engineering and traffic that have been doing all the no-wake zones, oh, yeah, this is marine stuff, Marine Resources. So I had to kind of pull together a bit of a model here that included the resources, the residents, and tourism to try to keep a balanced approach. And one of the first projects that it had me working on was Little Sabine Bay, that I used to live right there, and we'd at night, when the weather was pretty and the full moon was out, we'd get in the boat and we'd go water skiing out here at night. And, you know, this was our run, was right down this little narrow channel and turn around and come back and go down and back and forth. And occasionally we'd go over the grasses and you'd scar the grasses up a little bit. At the time, I was uncomfortable. I didn't realize what kind of damage it was until I went to school. But the Board of County Commissioners had a group led by Dan Green, John Green, we all went to school together.
Yep.
So Dan Green lived over here and he wanted to protect the seagrasses. And this whole area here is just a beautiful lush seagrass. And then this area here is a sandbar that's a little bit too shallow for the grasses, and there used to be an island right here we call Bird Crap Island. And so the county said, look, we got to do something to protect these seagrasses because the water quality is suffering. So I said, okay, well, if we protect this grass bed here, we're going to funnel all the traffic into these narrow channels, and I know how narrow these channels are. So we're going to have to make that a no-wake zone. So that took a year and probably a lot of friendships that people that I skied with that thought I was, you know, Benedict Arnold for making it now a no-wake zone. But it was the right thing to do for Little Sabine Bay. So
What year was that? When was that?
that was 2001 to 2002. 2000, 2001, early 2002. And one of the other projects that I got to work on was Project Green Shores. So the county put me in charge of the county's role in this big living shoreline project. So here's your offshore breakwaters, here's the planted Spartina, and it wasn't too long after that we had Hurricane Ivan. Hurricane Ivan, the water came up, the waves just simply washed right over the top of it. It looked better after Hurricane Ivan than it did before Hurricane Ivan. So the other projects of artificial reefs, these were all the artificial reefs that the county had built thus far. There was some out here in this area here that the state had a permit on, but I was told that we needed to get permits and maintain permits and start building reefs in the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America now. So all of the years of diving off Pensacola and elsewhere, one of my favorite reefs to dive were not the artificial reefs. My personal favorites were always the natural reefs, natural bottom. It's very low in most places, but it's where the marine life evolutionarily grew up, and if you want to call it that. So to me, building an artificial reef should first consider the attributes of a natural reef and build on that. Never forgetting that the sand around the artificial reefs is full of life. So when you're designing your artificial reefs, you need to design them with this in mind. So when you build your reef, and this is just some bridge rubble, that the marine life will flourish. And if you can find the attributes that you can improve, like height, we've learned that. If you can build a higher reef, that's generally more attractive for most of your marine life. But we also have threatened and endangered species. Yes, ma'am.
Before you leave that, you said before that the fish feed from the sand and the water above the reef. So what is the purpose of those concrete artificial reefs that y'all are putting out there? What's their purpose?
We think, and if we could speak fish, we could know for sure. But what we suspect, and there's some really good evidence that it's used as shelter. So the small fish feel safer with nearby shelter, and the large fish feel like it's a better place to hunt. So it's kind of a balance. You're kind of fooling the little fish into thinking that they're protected when they're not, because the bigger fish are eating it, and that's what you want. Is you want the artificial reef ecologically to function to channel energy from the plankton and the benthos in the seafloor, channel that through the prey species that the other fish like your grouper and snapper and triggerfish and amberjack are feeding on, because we want to grow for the consumptive uses for fishing and spearfishing. We want to improve the growth and reproduction of those target species. But very good question.
Thank you.
But we're also in an environment that has protected species. So things like sea turtles, this is a horrible blow up of this picture, but this is a vessel, this is a tugboat. And at night, and I learned this when I was diving offshore of Pensacola back in the 80s, we'd go out there at night and go spearfishing. Sea turtles love to put their head, tuck their head up underneath a ledge and go to sleep. They take a nap. So we know that any of that ledge habitat that can attract a sea turtle can't entrap the sea turtle. So we have to be really, really careful how we're building reefs so that we don't entrap or create an entanglement, because these are federally protected species. Not only these, but also marine mammals, and in the inshore we have Gulf sturgeon here too. So Hurricane Ivan comes through, and then I was pretty much focused on recovery from Hurricane Ivan. It destroyed all of our no-wake zone signs, and so for the next year or so, I was building new no-wake signs and repairing boat ramps. But one of the other things that we were able to do was to take the old fishing bridge that got damaged by Hurricane Ivan. So these are the two fishing bridges that used to be from Gulf Breeze out and from Pensacola out. So all that material was loaded on barges, and I would take the barges out, or take the captain that was on the tugboat and direct him to a target location, and then we'd have him anchor the barge on site so that they could deploy all the material, because you want that material to stack up and create those ledges. And so we had not only the fishing bridges, but we also had the I-10 bridge. And Dave Bogan, who we went to school with, was the DOT engineer in charge of that project. So when I found out that they were going to be replacing the bridge, is that telling me I'm up?
Well, just second question.
Oh, okay. I knew this was going to happen. So David Bogan, I give him credit. God rest his soul.
Bless his heart.
He's the one that pushed the DOT bridge replacement to use all that bridge rubble for artificial reefs. So one of the biggest artificial reefs that we built. And then, of course, the Oriskany came available, and I worked on that project with the Navy and the state of Florida. And after it was sank, I got to dive it the very next day, and just a beautiful day in the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America. And that ship has just been phenomenal. It's been 20 years next month since that ship was raised. And all of this work that I'm doing, thank God my wife is a saint, but I've got two little girls that that now they're little water babies too, and I've tried to instill in them the love of the water and its marine life, and how we should take care of it. And then Earth Day 2010, Deepwater Horizon, and we're thinking, okay, they're gonna be able to cap it off. They're gonna cap it off. It's not gonna be bad. It's not gonna be bad. So by May, we realized that this thing is not gonna get capped off anytime soon, and we're gonna deal with oil. So we had a big meeting at the Emergency Operations Center, and we looked at the Coast Guard's plan, their national response plan, their oil spill response plan, and it's insufficient. So the county commissioners met a couple of days later and authorized me to put together a local action plan. So we put boom out, but June 10th, I couldn't sleep. I went down to Fort Pickens and saw the first oil arriving on Pensacola. We didn't know what it was. It looked like peanut butter, but it was coming in on an incoming tide. That whole summer we had flood tides at night. So all the tides were bringing this oil into Pensacola Bay. And this is right around the point from Fort Pickens. So I put out these boom sets around all the bayous, and had to have a boat there to allow boat traffic to get in and out. So we had to have a contractor there, you know, pretty much 24 hours a day. We got some restoration money. We had over $3.5 million of restoration money. So I was able to build artificial reefs with that, patch reefs, to be able to restore the lost human use. And that October, while we were looking for submerged oil, we found the first lionfish. So now we got lionfish on top of an oil spill. And I took one lionfish, this is about a lionfish about this long, off one of our artificial reefs, opened it up on the deck of the boat, and I think there's 23 or 24 vermilion snapper in this one fish. It was just sitting there gobbling fish. So I speared it, brought it up, and confirmed what it was eating. So also I'm able to deploy vessels. I'm going to have to go through this pretty quick. This is a video of one of the reefs being deployed. I've mounted a camera, a GoPro camera to it, so it's being lifted off the deck of the boat by the crane. So the captain is swinging the boat around, holding it on location. I've given him an XY target, a latitude and longitude, and he holds, there's a GPS antenna on top of the crane, so he knows exactly where that reef module is hanging. And you'll see it get splashed in the water, and the reef will go down to the bottom here in just a second. Beautiful day on the Gulf. Beautiful.
Look at that.
Okay, here we go. So now the reef's going down. All the bubbles coming up. You'll see we're actually faster than a jellyfish can swim. Right there. So gets to the bottom, and now you can see the sea floor. There's the sand puffing up. So that's how we do the artificial reefs when we're building these patch reefs. Very precise. We've also been able to put reefs off Pensacola Beach. The first ever snorkeling reef was off Pensacola Beach right after the oil spill. So these are put on these fiberglass pilings. The pilings are jetted down into the seabed to hold them in place. And then after the marine life retracts, you get turtles and fish and all kinds of cool stuff. The Patty family was getting rid of a barge, and one of our good friends, Kevin Marchetti, was a steel worker and an artist, and put all these things out. This is the Joe Patty barge, a real big diving attraction. When we found out that the Pensacola Bay Bridge was going to be replaced, we asked the Board of County Commissioners to request DOT to do what we did with I-10 and put all that material in the Gulf. So they built these slide barges, and 240 odd voyages it took to put all 110,000 tons of concrete in the Gulf. And we had to watch out for turtles and dolphins. They like to come up and see what's going on, the disturbance. So part of my job is to watch out. This is a leatherback, a big leatherback. It's like 6 feet long. So here's what the reef areas look like now. You can see we put a tremendous number of reefs out here in this site. We've got memorial reefs there, so if you want to memorialize someone, these can be purchased for $2,245, and we'll take the money and build the next sets of reefs. We don't have corals here that build reefs. The corals that build reefs are more of a tropical species, so the water gets too cold here in the summer, or too cold in the winter. But this was a beautiful octocoral. This is a soft coral, just a beautiful one growing on one of our artificial reefs, and I saw that. I had to get a picture of it. Beautiful. Really, it's one of my favorite pictures. Sometimes you like the small stuff. And then you can see red snapper, gray snapper. There's an almaco jack kind of tucked around. This is around one of the tops of one of those artificial reef modules. Triggerfish, a little baby lane snapper, and I'm really happy to see the recovery of Goliath grouper. Back in the day, we lost those to over-harvesting. Here's another reef site. This is an experiment that we're getting ready to build 65 patch reefs that are set out in an experimental design. So the future master's degree students and PhDs, they'll have a replicated design for for these patch reefs to be able to go out and study. And just when you think you've got everything figured out and there's nothing that can come out of left field, you find out from the Army Corps of Engineers that there's unexploded ordnance in these areas. So if I was able to show, there used to be a reef site here, no more. This is what they call the high use area. So these are all the artificial reefs. You Oriskany's way over here. And it allows me, I've also been allowed to do some real innovative stuff. I designed and built this remote set of GoPros that can go down to the seafloor. I don't have to dive. I can send it down and do remote monitoring. I was in my office one day and I got a letter of intent from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. This is Turpin Bayou. So this is the state preserve. And you see this boundary line here. So this is all state preserve all the way around. They were going to build a residential subdivision all the way around this, between that line and this line. So all this area would have been houses and, with all of the watercraft. This is a very shallow embayment with a lot of fringe marsh. It would have been destroyed. So my boss let me work with the other staff, the attorneys, and we were able to acquire this with the state of Florida from the developer, and now this is permanently protected as a state park. So we expanded Turpin Bayou, and this is the only undeveloped distributary of water in northwest Florida of that size.
Good.
So I also have to do boat ramps. We were able to take some of the money from the Deepwater Horizon, and we built 4 new boat ramps. With those, I get to do dredging projects. This is the entrance to Lafitte Cove where you go to peg legs. All this sand that gets washed over, this has to be removed at least once or twice a year. Right now we're in the midst of another beach renourishment. So I worked with the first beach renourishment to make sure that they weren't harming any artificial reefs or any kind of cultural or historical resources. Up until last year, I managed the sea turtle nesting and stranding program. Now somebody else is doing that, and kind of hurt my feelings. But you got to give some stuff to the young crowd. And then derelict vessels. This is the worst part of my job. I can't do an honest presentation without showing you the worst part of my job. And literally, I'm out there bailing these boats out. Some of them, but only the smallest. On the bigger ones, I have to hire a company to come in, a towing service to do these bigger and more cumbersome projects. So that's it. Sorry if I went a few minutes over. There's a lot left on the cutting room floor.
It's hard.
26 years, and I have about 60 to 80 projects going on at any one time. There's a lot. I enjoy it. I love it. It was a very fortunate set of circumstances that I was able to take advantage of that gave me this job. And I thank my family, I thank God, and I thank the community and the people that I know that call me sometimes in the middle of the night when something's not going right, because I can't be everywhere and can't keep my eyes on everything, but I do have a great support group, and I appreciate the Historical Society inviting me and allowing me to go over time.
Well, we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much
So
for
cool.
all what you've done for us in this area. And this is your gift for being here. Those are ginger crinkle cookies.
Oh my goodness.
They're so good.
I'm glad I rode my bike. Yeah.